Welcome to Motivation at Hand, Ma. To know is to know how. Part 4. Case 123 CR00257 TSC Document 139 filed November 6, 2023, in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, defendant. Government's omnibus opposition to defendant's motions to dismiss the indictment on statutory and constitutional grounds. A. The defendant's statutory challenges lack merit. A. The indictment alleges deceit, trickery, or dishonest means. 2. The indictment alleges deceit in connection with the fraudulent electors. The defendant contends electronic case files, ECF, number 114 at 9-13 that the indictment fails to allege deceit in connection with the fraudulent electors because the defendant and co-conspirators did not attempt to present the fraudulent electors as the electoral slates certified by the states. This argument, too, rests on recasting the actual allegations in the indictment, which make clear that this part of the conspiracy was, indeed, deceitful. First, 5 of the slates of fraudulent elector certificates were false on their face. They asserted that the electors were duly elected when they were not, and the conspirators resisted the addition of language that would water down that facial, and false, claim of validity. ECF number 1 at paragraph 61. Beyond the fraud on the face of the documents. The indictment contains ample allegations of deceit in the scheme to create and use the fraudulent elector slates. C. Same as at paragraph 58, fake votes, paragraph 62, fraudulent slates used to supplant legitimate slates, paragraph 63, certifying illegal votes, and paragraph 64, elector scheme propped up by litigation that was a pretext. Moreover, as the defendant has acknowledged elsewhere, the indictment clearly alleges that these actions were part and parcel of the defendant's alleged attempts to convince the Vice President and members of Congress to act in his favor. ECF number 74 at 42. It was only by presenting these fake ballots that the defendant could try to make it appear, falsely, that there was a bona fide dispute about which electors should be counted. ECF number 1 at paragraphs 53, 54b. And while the absence of any accompanying certificate of ascertainment might have alerted some that the false elector slates did not represent the official elector slates approved by the states, it does not follow, as the defendant suggests, that the use of the fake electoral slates was lacking in deceit. From start to finish, false claims of election fraud provided the rationale for the fraudulent electors, making the fraudulent electors a vehicle for those false claims. Co-conspirators lied to some of the fraudulent electors, falsely telling them that their votes would be used only if ongoing litigation changed the results in the defendant's favor. ECF number 1 at paragraphs 56, 61, 62. The defendant later tried to use the Department of Justice to send a letter to state officials falsely stating that the department had found problems that may have changed the outcome of the election, and urging state legislatures to convene in special sessions to choose the fraudulent electors over the legitimate electors. Same as paragraphs 70-75. And using the false claims of voter fraud, the defendant and co-conspirators tried to convince the Vice President to accept the fraudulent electors and reject the legitimate electoral votes. Same as paragraphs 86, 90. The defendant's contention, ECF number 114 at 11. That he merely tried to persuade officials to consider alternate slates, overlooks that the basis for this so-called persuasion were the knowingly false statements of voter fraud and that he was not engaged in persuasion but instead, as the indictment alleges, in making false statements that he repeatedly deployed. The defendant also argues, ECF number 114 at 12-13, that the lies to fraudulent electors to induce some of them to participate in the sham process do not establish deceit for purposes of alleging a violation of the defraud clause. But under the defraud clause, the deceitful or dishonest conduct may be directed at a third party, so long as the defendant is merely using the third party to reach the government function that is ultimately the target of the fraud. Canner, 483 U.S. at 129. Here, the lies to fraudulent electors were yet another form of deceit aimed at obstructing the government function of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the election. 3. The defendant made false statements to the Vice President. The defendant contends, ECF number 114 at 8-9, that his statements to the Vice President about the Vice President's authority at the certification proceeding in Congress cannot establish his intent to deceive for purposes of the defraud clause because misrepresentations of law cannot constitute fraud. The defendant is correct that many courts appear to have stated, as a general rule, that misrepresentations of law are not actionable at common law, United States ex rel. Schuta vs. SuperValue Incorporated, 598 U.S. 739, 756, 2023. But that general rule does not apply or provide a defense to the charges here. Even if accepted as governing law in federal fraud cases, see Nieder, 527 U.S. at 24-25, suggesting otherwise, the rule has significant limits on its own terms, Schuta, 598 U.S. at 756. For instance, statements involving some legal analysis remain actionable if they carry with them, by implication, an assertion about facts that justify the speaker's statement. Same as quoting restatement, second, of torts section 545, CMT. C. 1977. Thus, even assuming some of the defendant's statements about the Vice President's authority could qualify as misrepresentations of law, such statements. For example, his statement that the Vice President had the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors from certain states, ECF number 1 at paragraph 96A, were undergirded by specific factual lies. That the Vice President could and should do so because outcome determinative voter fraud took place in those states and there was a bona fide dispute about which slate of electors should be counted. Thus, even if the common law rule on misrepresentations of law applied, the defendant's statements about and to the Vice President are powerful evidence of fraud. See same as paragraph 90. In late December and early January, the defendant repeated knowingly false claims of election fraud and directly pressured the Vice President to use his ceremonial role at the certification proceeding on January 6 to fraudulently overturn the results of the election. B. The indictment alleges obstruction, not political advocacy. The defendant argues, ECF number 114 at 14-15, that the allegations in the indictment consist solely of political advocacy, not obstruction of a government function. That argument fails because the indictment alleges not lobbying or political advocacy, but instead that the defendant engaged in a multifaceted conspiracy aimed at overturning the results of the presidential election by targeting deceit at the federal government function, which included the certification proceeding on January 6, by which votes are collected, counted, and certified. C. The defendant's invocation of interpretative canons does not support dismissal. The defendant's invocation, ECF number 114 at 15-21, of several principles of statutory interpretation to justify his assertion that the conduct alleged in the indictment does not fall within Section 371 as a matter of law is disingenuous. Other than to ask that Section 371 be narrowly construed to ensure that it does not criminalize vast swaths of ordinary political activity and First Amendment protected speech, same as at 15. He does not focus on any statutory term and attempt to explain why it is vague or ambiguous, or offer any interpretation of what the statute should mean. Indeed, the defendant agrees, same as at 3, regarding the essential elements of an offense under the defraud clause. Those elements limit the scope of the defraud clause and ensure that it does not reach the sort of innocent conduct posited by the defendant, and thus no novel narrowing construction is necessary. The conspiracies criminalized by Section 371 are defined not only by the nature of the injury intended by the conspiracy, and the method used to effectuate the conspiracy, but also, and most importantly, by the target of the conspiracy. Canner, 483 U.S. at 130. Because a defraud clause conspiracy must be targeted at the United States or any agency thereof. It does not reach the vast array of private fraud potentially criminalized by other federal fraud statutes. Or permit federal prosecutors to set standards of disclosure and good government for local and state officials. Kelly v. United States, 140 Supreme Court 1565, 1571, 2020. Moreover, obstruction of the government function must be a purpose or object of the conspiracy, and not merely a foreseeable consequence of the conspiratorial scheme. United States v. Goldberg, 105 F. 3rd 770, 773, 1st circa 1997, citing Dennis, 384 U.S. at 861. Further, the defraud clause is limited only to wrongs done by deceit, craft or trickery, or at least by means that are dishonest, and does not reach obstructing government functions in other ways, for example, by violence, robbery or advocacy of illegal action. United States v. Caldwell, 989 F. 2nd 1056, 1059, 9th circa 2019-93, quoting Hammerschmidt, 265 U.S. at 188, overruled on other grounds Binder, 527 U.S. at 8-9. The requirement of deceit, craft, trickery, or dishonest conduct, which flows from the statutory term defraud, also brings with it the fraud-related doctrine of materiality. Seender, 527 U.S. at 20-25. Finally, the overt act requirement provides another limitation, the function of which is to manifest that the conspiracy is at work, and is neither a project still resting solely in the minds of the conspirators, nor a fully completed operation no longer in existence. These requirements, taken together, confirm that Section 371 does not reach the sort of good faith advocacy and lobbying that the defendant says should fall outside its scope. As such, there is no need to adopt some unspecified narrowing construction to avoid problems of potential overbreadth. ECF number 114 at 15-16, or fatal vagueness, same as at 17-18. See below this point page 29 number 11, discussing overbreadth, United States v. Bronstein, 849 F. 3rd 1101, 1106, D.C. circa 2017. The vagueness doctrine spurns attempts to save a statute from unconstitutional vagueness based on speculative tests detached from statutory elements that do not craft a principled and objective standard. Nor do the rules of lenity, ECF number 114 at 18-19, or constitutional avoidance, same as at 16-17, have any relevance here. See Muscarello v. United States, 524 U.S. 125, 138-39, 1998. The rule of lenity applies only if, after seizing everything from which aid can be derived, we can make no more than a guess as to what Congress intended, such that there is a grievous ambiguity or uncertainty in the statute. Johnson v. Arteaga Martinez, 142 Supreme Court 1827, 1833, 2022. The canon of constitutional avoidance is only applicable where a statute has more than one plausible construction. Finally, the defendant offers a strained argument, ECF number 114 at 19-21, that he was not and cannot be charged under the General False Statement Statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, for his deceit aimed at a congressional proceeding, and therefore that he cannot be charged with any crime at all. The argument fails on at least two grounds. First, in a matter within the jurisdiction of the legislative branch, Section 1001 does, in fact, apply to a document required by law, rule, or regulation to be submitted to the Congress or any office or officer within the legislative branch. 18 U.S.C. Section 1001c, 1. But more fundamentally, the applicability or inapplicability of one statute, based on law or facts, does not govern the applicability of another well-established statute with entirely different language, scope, and elements. The Federal Criminal Code is replete with provisions that criminalize overlapping conduct. And the mere fact that two federal criminal statutes criminalize similar conduct says little about the scope of either. Pasquantino, 544 U.S. at 359. To be continued. Part 5. 2. The indictment adequately alleges violations of 18 U.S.C. sections 1512K and C2. Much appreciation to you for giving of your time with us at Motivation at Hand. To know is to know how. We trust you will come back soon.